Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thank you for joining me once again for one of these Magic the Gathering reviews. And this time around, we've gone through a couple of boxes of Lorwyn Eclipsed, so why not get into the two commander decks that have come in. And we have strange combination, one of 5 colors and one of 3, so a little bit odd for it to come out this way, but we've got one for elementals, Dance of the Elementals, which lets you summon huge elementals and sacrifice and duplicate them. Now we've seen a lot of these already, of the brand new ones that have the encore mechanics, and we also got one of the commanders, not this Ashling one, but one of the other ones there, Might of Many or Multitude of Many, something like that. And then over here we have Blight Curse, which is going to deal with creature combos and -1/-1 drains. That has the Auntie and the Reaper King No More as the primary ones there. So we are going to get into this and see kind of what the full deck lists are looking like, to see how good they are looking like straight out of the box there. And right here, they want you to give Auntie a little kiss, so, you know, pucker up and give her a little bit of a smooch. As always, we get some extra stuff in here, a little bit of information regarding the deck that also gives a little image here of the commander, Auntie, but not of the Reaper King, since the Reaper King is the second of the commanders there. Little commander deck box that has the same Auntie that's on the cover here. And sometimes we get a little pack, but not this time, it's looking like. So, just going to be getting up the cards themselves, and let's take a peek in here. And it looks like we've got some sort of Phyrexian card in here, because that's definitely what I see there. Now, I've got a whole strip there to be able to pull from, but did not actually give a pull tab for me to be able to use it. So we're just gonna have to barbarically open this up from the top instead, so that we can start looking at the cards one by one here. So starting all of this off, we are going to have a foil version of a card that we had gotten before, Auntie Curse Wretch. 1, a black, red, and a green for a 4/4 legendary Goblin Warlock with Ward of Blight 2, meaning that if your opponent wants to target Auntie with anything at all, they are going to need to put 2 -1/-1 counters on a creature that they control. And whenever one or more -1/-1 counters are put on a creature, you draw a card if you control it. And if you don't, its controller loses 1 life. So they make their stuff a little bit smaller and lose a life. You can put some on your own things to help draw you some extra cards there. Honestly, I think that both of these decks are pretty interesting for what they end up doing. So that's going to be our first of our commanders there. And our second one there is going to be one that we had also gotten as well, the Reaper King No More, who is going to be all hybrid mana, 2 or a black, 2 or a red, or 2 and 2 or a green, for a 3/3 legendary artifact creature Scarecrow, formerly a 5-color commander in the original, I think it was in Shadowmoor. But he has come back. When the Reaper ETBs, you put a -1/-1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Now, you could put them on your own if you've got Auntie out to be able to help draw a card. You could put it on 2 separate things to be able to make opponents lose a life. And it's whenever you put 1 or more onto a creature. So that means if you when this ETBs and you put it out and you put it on 2 separate of your own creatures, then you can be getting 2 cards drawn instead. Whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you may put that card onto the battlefield under your control. Do it only once each turn. Honestly, a very powerful effect of being able to steal some of your opponent's stuff. Obviously, you want to get some of that -1/-1 synergy throughout everything. whether it be putting it on your own stuff and then taking them off for some effects, or putting it onto your opponents so that they die and then you get them. If it's not already in here, a Massacre Girl goes very, very far with all of this. So we'll have to see how it goes. Well, I guess it would only allow you to get one thing, but you know, it's a good way to wipe the board and keep some stuff. We're also going to get a new card here, Wickersmith's Tools, that we didn't get before. 3 mana for an artifact. Whenever one or more -1/-1 counters are put on a creature, you put a charge counter on this artifact. You can tap this to add 1 mana of any color. So kind of your standard bad, if you want to call it that. One in terms of that of just, it's 3 mana to do for 1, kind of like Commander Sphere. But you can also pay 5 and tap this to sack it to create X tapped 2/2 colorless scarecrow artifact creature tokens, where X is the number of charge counters on this artifact. Now, because you're going to be putting so many on this because of the -1/-1 counters you're putting out, well, you're probably going to be able to overrun them with the amount of scarecrows, these tokens that you're going to get. So this is a big finisher that you could end up doing if you're able to get through it. One that we had gotten here before, well, actually twice in our collector boosters, is Sinister Gnarlbark, 2 and a black for 04 Treefolk Warlock. Beginning of your end step, draw a card and Blight 1. So instead of losing a life for something like Phyrexian Arena, you instead put the -1/-1 on one of your creatures there, and you draw the card. So you're not losing quite as much life, but this does happen at the end of turn, so you can't really plan it quite as well as if you had something like Phyrexian Arena that was doing it in your upkeep there. So, you know, that's kind of the trade-off, is it's not quite as bad with putting the -1/-1, but you do it at the end of your turn instead. But it does put -1/-1 counters on it, so that's decent. We did, I believe, get this one as well. Eventide's Shadow, 4 and a black sorcery. Remove any number of counters from among permanents on the battlefield. You draw cards and lose life equal to the number of counters removed this way. So you can put a bunch of the -1/-1s on your own stuff and then remove them later on to be with this to draw a bunch of cards. You lose a bunch of life though, but it is a way for you to be able to draw a bunch of cards. Another one that we had gotten, Aberrant Return, 4 and double black for a sorcery. You put 1, 2, or 3 target creature cards from graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. Each of them enters with an additional -1/-1 counter on it. So just getting a -1/-1 on them, so can't be getting anything with 1 toughness. But, you know, it's a way to revive 3 things for 6 mana. Another one we had gotten here as well, Dread Tiller, 1 a black and a green for a 2/4 artifact creature Scarecrow. When it ETBs, you put a -1/-1 on target creature, whether you want to do it on your own and draw a card, on an opponent's, make them lose a life, or potentially steal one of their creature. And whenever a creature with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you may put a land from your hand or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So get a little bit of extra ramp if something with them dies. So it does kind of help out along with that, whether you have it in your hand or you've discarded it, milled it, you've got ways of getting it back easy enough. Looks like we're still getting ones that we already had that were new. Grave Venerations, 3 and a black, enchantment. When this ETBs, you become the Monarch. Always nice to introduce the Monarch there, getting some extra card draw, a little bit more interactiveness between the players. Beginning of your end step, if you're the Monarch, return up to 1 target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So it acts like a little bit of an internal witness each turn if you're the Monarch. And whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life and you gain a life. So just a little bit of a semi-draining effect for every time one of your things dies as well. Off-Nabbed Goat, I really enjoy this one here, 1 and a black for an 05 Goat. Pay 1 mana, draw a card, gain control of this creature, and put a -1/-1 counter on it. Only your opponents may activate this ability, and only as a sorcery. So pay 1 mana, draw a card, not that bad. When this creature dies, if it had 1 or more -1/-1 counters on it, its owner draws that many cards, and each other player loses that much life. Now, The thing is, it's talking about gaining control of this. However, the owner of it still stays the same. So when this does end up dying, the owner, the person whose deck is in it, gets to end up drawing a whole bunch of extra cards and making other people lose a whole lot of extra life because it went around so much. And they might not, the opponents that are playing against this in the decks are probably not going to get quite as much value for it. We're also going to get some Village Pillagers. I'm not sure if we had gotten this one in our packs. 3 and double red for a 5/5 Goblin Warrior with Wither. Deals damage to creatures and -1/-1 counters, so it gets around indestructible. When this creature ETBs, it deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. So can knock down a whole lot of small creatures. Whenever a creature your opponent controls with a counter on it dies, you create a tapped treasure token. So you put a whole lot of -1/-1 counters out there, end up killing them. You could potentially be getting some of them back, getting treasure tokens. It's a lot of extra stuff that you can do because of that. More that we've had before, Puka's Covenant, 2 and a green. Enchantment, whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, you may return another target permanent with mana value less than or equal to the number of counters on the creature from your graveyard to your hand. Do it only once each turn. So depending on how many you are able to get onto it, you could potentially be repeating things that get out based off of the number of -1/-1 counters that you had out. Goes well with killing your own things to be able to get the treasure tokens, or just getting some sort of benefit because you want maybe the drawing the cards with Auntie. Theraphor, Young Yu, 6 and a green, 4/7, legendary creature, tree folk druid. ETBs, you create a number of 1/1 green sapperling creature tokens equal to the number of counters among creatures target player controls, so you can get a whole lot of counters out there. And you can also tap to double the number of each kind of counter on target creature, so you can make potentially one really big if you've got +1/+1 counters on it for, let's say, the Tidus deck, or you can pump up the number of -1/-1 counters on a creature on your opponent's side of the field to have it die. There's a few different ways. It is a bit more of an expensive card. However, with the doubling the amount of counters, it kind of makes sense for it to be that expensive. Now, a reprint, however, one with a different artwork. Tree of Perdition, 3 and a black for an 0/13 plant with Defender. However, you can tap this to exchange target opponent's life total with this creature's toughness. So what you can do is you can tap this, and this can become an 0/40 and your opponent has 13 life left. Or if your opponent has gained a whole lot of life during the game and they've got 100, 200, 300, infinite amount of life there, you can tap this to give this a big butt and then be able to swing into your opponent when they only have the 13 life left. But nice little new artwork there, definitely making it of the Lorwyn variety with the whole eclipsed sun there. We've got some bones in the foreground there, and obviously the big scary tree in the background. Now, I cannot quite remember which of these are brand new lands, but these do have some decent lands in them now. Vernal Fen, a swamp and a forest, so you can search for swamp and forest. Enters tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. So yeah, it's a dual land that can help out with that. Festering Thicket, also a swamp and a forest, and enters tapped, but you can search for it as a forest or swamp. It also has cycling, so you can replace it if you don't really need it. Also kind of another good one for that that Dread Tiller, or whatever it was called, of you could cycle this out of your hand. Now it's in your graveyard and you drew another card, and the Dread Tiller in one of your opponent's creatures with the -1/-1 counter on dies, and this comes back onto the battlefield from your graveyard. And we're also going to get some Necroskitter, 1 and double black for a 1/4 elemental with Wither. And whenever a creature an opponent controls with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you may return that card to the battlefield under your control. So it is very similar to the Reaper King No More, except that it happens for everything. It's not a once per turn stipulation. So this is something that can go in conjunction with it, or just completely replace the Reaper if you want. Big thing is the Reaper can be in your command zone while this cannot. Ignoble Hierarch, nice little mana ramp here with some new artwork of a bit more of a, the goblins of Lorwyn here. 1 green for an 0/1 Goblin Shaman with Exalted. Creature attacks alone, they get an additional +1/+1 until end of turn, and this can tap to add black, green, or red, which is just a good little mana dork there. Getting another one of these Lands Nesting Grounds, a land that can tap for a colorless. You can pay 1 and tap this to move a counter from target permanent you control onto a second target permanent. Activate only as a sorcery, so you can move it from your own to something else. So you can put the Wither onto your own things, or -1/-1s onto your own thing, and then use this to be able to move it around, though it does cost 1, and it only does 1 a turn. And looky here, a Massacre Girl, just as we were saying we wanted. Massacre Girl, known killer, 2 and double black for a 4/4 legendary human assassin with Menace. Creatures you control have Wither, so all of your creatures now deal combat damage in the form of -1/-, and not combat damage, just damage in general. They deal it in -1/-1 counters. Very, very good. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, you draw a card. So your opponent's creatures with the -1/-1 counters on them perish, and they perish because of those -1/-1s, and they'll have 0 toughness, then, oh well, they lost it that way, and you get to draw a card. Massacre Girl, a very, very good card in this particular deck. Grave Titan, good old classic, 4 double black, 6/6 giant with Death Touch. When it ETBs or attacks, you get to create 2/2 black zombie creature tokens. So you're going about having some places to put your own Blight worthy things, and they can take 2 counters instead of the one that the Saprolings are able to do. So that's another option for you. You get a little commander from the Phyrexian corner here. Maybe this is where the counters are from. Vraska, Betrayal Sting, 4 a black and a Phyrexian black mana. So you can either pay that with a black or 2 life. For a 6 loyalty legendary planeswalker Vraska, if you do use the completed and you pay 2 life instead of the cost, it does reduce her loyalty by 2 counters. For 0 loyalty, you draw a card, lose a life, and then you proliferate, so you can put an additional loyalty counter on Vraska. For -2 loyalty, target creature becomes a treasure artifact with tap, sack this artifact, add 1 mana of any color, and loses all other card types and abilities. So you essentially make something that is troubling on your opponent's side, that's a creature, into a treasure token. And for -9, which is unlikely for you to get, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. So you put them at 9 poison, so that the very next turn you do the 0, you proliferate, and you knock them out of the game. But it's unlikely that you're going to get that final one there. Scorpion God, so getting some more big boys here. 3 a black and a red for a 6/5 legendary god with whenever a creature with a -1/-1 counter on it dies, you draw a card. So more of that effect that we are looking at with Massacre Girl and all of these other synergies. And for 1 a black and a red, you can put a -1/-1 counter on another target creature. If you're able to make infinite mana in black and red, then you can destroy everything. And when the Scorpion God dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So it goes to the graveyard, but then goes to the owner's hand afterwards, so you'd have to try to disrupt with some form. I'm wondering if it does still go back if it gets exiled from the graveyard or not. I'm not too sure. This looks like maybe a one from one of the Planeswalker decks. It costs a whole lot. It's got big numbers on it, so I'm assuming that this is probably one of those not terribly good ones. 5 in double black, 5 loyalty, legendary Planeswalker Liliana. Go up to loyalty, you put a -1/-1 counter on up to one target creature. -3, you destroy target creature with a -1/-1 counter on it. And for 10 loyalty down, you return all creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, it's not fantastic. It definitely feels like one of those, and I'd probably take this out as one of the first ones there, just because it's so expensive and there's so many better things that you could potentially have in these. Now we are going to have a little bit of Ixalan here as well, Chamil, the Inner Sun, which is actually one that I don't believe I've pulled yet from the Ixalan boxes. 6 mana for a legendary artifact. Spells you control can't be countered. That's always nice. Beginning of your end step, you'll discover 5. So exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with mana value 5 or less. Cast it without paying its mana cost or put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom in a random order. So you could potentially be casting a free spell there or putting it into your hand as a draw. You know, if they don't get rid of this, it will keep on compounding itself. So a little bit of card draw, if you want to call it that. We're also going to get a Carnifex Demon, 4 in double black for a 6/6 Phyrexian Demon with flying. When this ETBs with 2 -1/-1 counters on it, and you can pay 1 black to remove a -1/-1 counter on it to put a -1/-1 on each other creature. So it's a good way of being able to do that. You can continuously put some more on with some of your other synergies here. So you're able to continuously pump out the -1/-1s on other things. Puppeteer Click, 3 in double black for a 3/2 Fairy Wizard with flying. When this ETBs, put target creature card from an opponent's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. It gains haste, and at the beginning of your next end step, you will exile it. So a little brief reanimation spell that lets you swing in really hard for it or get some good ETB or death trigger. But this also will have persist, so when this dies, if it has no -1/-1 counters on it, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a -1/-1 on it and get that ETB trigger again and swing in with the big stompy boy again. Dark Urchins, 2 in a black for a 4/3 oof. When this attacks or blocks, you put a -1/-1 on it, and when this dies, you draw a card for each -1/-1 on it. So you could be removing the -1/-1s to keep it going, or maybe you want to get the 3 on there so that eventually you're able to just have it die and draw 3 cards. You know, it's just another option for you there of being able to draw some extra cards. Black Sun Zenith, a good old classic from Mirrodin, X and double black for a sorcery where you put X -1/-1 counters on each creature. You shuffle this back into its owner's library. It's a removal spell for a whole bunch of creatures for you in black. And because it's -1/-1 counters, it works really good with this deck. Painful Truth's another good little draw spell for us. 2 in a black for a sorcery with Converge. You draw X cards and lose X life, where X is equal to the number of colors of mana spent to cast this. So you're probably going to be trying to do 3 so that you can draw 3 cards. Losing 3 life isn't going to be all that bad with this. Persist, the name of the mechanic itself. 1 in a black sorcery. You return target non-legendary creature from your graveyard to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. So you're able to move that one around if you want to, or, you know, potentially remove this from your deck to add something a little bit better. Who knows? You gotta have to decide on that one. Midnight Banshee, 3 and triple black for a 5/5 spirit that also has Wither. And at the beginning of your upkeep, put a -1/-1 counter on each non-black creature. So putting a lot of -1/-1 counters on your opponent's stuff if they're not running in black. Chain reaction here, 2 and double red for sorcery, deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield, so a way to try to destroy a bunch of creatures if someone has gone wide, so a little bit of a board wipe. Archfiend of Ifnir, one that I very much enjoy for my anti-Falcon Wrath deck. 3 and double black for a 5/4 demon with flying, and whenever you cycle or discard another card, you put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents controls. So ability to get a bunch of -1/-1 counters out on things, so getting another one of these is always nice. This also has cycling in and of itself, so if you really don't want it, you can toss it into the graveyard to be able to draw a card. Maybe you want to use the persist on this to bring it back for a bit cheaper. You cycle it out one turn, draw the extra card, next turn get the persist out and have them out there. You know, just one way to do it. Channeler Initiate, 1 and a green, 3/4 human druid. ETBs, put 3 -1/-1s on target creature you control. Tap to remove a -1/-1 from this creature to add 1 mana of any color. So this is a good target for you to be able to put the -1/-1s from your Blight or from other things, because you can just tap it to remove counters from it. So good option for you to do it there. Hapatra, Vizier of Poisons, a black and a green, 2/2, legendary human cleric. Whenever it deals damage to a player, you can put a -1/-1 on target creature. Whenever you put 1 or more -1/-1 counters on a creature, you create a 1/1 green snake creature token with Death Touch. So putting a whole bunch of -1/-1 counters out on separate creatures, you can get yourself a whole lot of Death Touchy snakes, and it's good to have those back as defenders. Whoops. Glissa Sunslayer. So 1, a black and green, 3/3 Phyrexian, legendary Phyrexian zombie elf with First Strike and Death Touch. Very nifty combination there of being able to tap them and let them attack them and have them die before they even deal damage to you. And whenever Glissa Sunslayer deals combat damage to a player, because if they don't want some of their stuff to die, they're just going to let it through, you get to choose one. You can draw a card and lose a life, you can destroy an enchantment, or you can remove up to 3 counters from target permanent. So if one of your things has a lot of -1/-1 counters on it and you don't like that, well, you can remove them with this. But you're probably going to be doing one of the top 2 options more likely than not, because extra card draw and destroying enchantments being ones that are a little bit harder to get rid of. We're also going to get a little bit of Everlasting Torment, 2 and a hybrid black-red for an enchantment that makes it so players can't gain life. So things are going to happen. Damage can't be prevented. Sorry, no more fogs. Turbo Fog doesn't work. All damage is dealt as though its source had Wither, so another way of inflicting Wither and getting a lot of things to die with -1/-1 counters. That is exactly what you want. Assassin's Trophy, good little removal of black and a green. Instant, destroy target permanent an opponent controls. They can search for a basic land and put it on the battlefield and shuffle. Just good old cheap removal. Grim Poppet, 7 mana, 7 whole mana for a 4/4 artifact creature scarecrow that enters with 3 -1/-1s on it. And you can remove a -1/-1 from this to put a -1/-1 on another target creature. Now, initially I would say this is 7 mana. That comes in as basically a 1/1. Not that great. However, this can store up to 3 -1/-1 counters on it before it dies, and it costs no mana to remove a -1/-1 from this, so you could potentially get rid of a whole bunch of different creatures by doing the removals. And additionally, because it's remove 1 -1/-1 to put 1 -1/-1, each time you do it can activate one of your effects there of putting a -1/-1 on a creature, like for Hapatra, that lets you get another snake, or potentially drawing a card, or anything there that you might necessarily want. So it's a good way of being able to store them up and being able to distribute them later on. Canyon Slow, cycling land for black and red. Sheltered Sheltered Thicket, tap cycle land for forest and mountains. Exotic Orchard, tap mana fixing from things your opponents have. Smoldering Marsh, 2 basic land, 1 for black and red. Cinderglade, 2 basic land for red and green. Dragon Skull Summit, have to have a swamp or mountain, but mana fixes. Rootbound Crag, mana fixes if you've got forest and mountains. Woodland Cemetery, same with swamp and forest. You got to have a lot of them there to be able to help out with at least 3 colors, not to mention the 5-color one we got coming up. Lasting Tarfire, 1 and a red for an enchantment, beginning of your next end step. If you put a counter on a creature this turn, this enchantment deals 2 damage to each opponent. So you could potentially be at every single turn trying to put a -1/-1 counter on something, like with the 7-mana artifact that we saw here, this Grim Poppet. You can just remove a -1/-1 on each of your opponent's turns if you've got 3 stored up on this, and say, hey, you know, everybody gets to take 2 damage, and then goes to your turn and you're going to be doing your own stuff. Being able to get it done really fast. Burning Curiosity, 2 and a red sorcery, additional cost. You can Blight 1. You're going to always want to. Exile top 2 cards of your library. If the additional cost was paid, exile top 3 until the end of your next turn. You can play those, so, you know, a little bit of impulse draw. Hoarder's Greed, 3 and a black sorcery. You lose 2, draw 2, then clash with an opponent. If you win, you repeat this process. Clashing players reveal the top cards of their library. They put the card, then put that card on the top or bottom. A player with wins if their card had the greater mana value. So depending on how you work things, potentially could do this over and over again. If you reveal it and you've got a really, really powerful one like the Grim Poppet that has 7, you could keep it on top afterwards and just keep on doing it until you're like, yeah, you know, I've drawn enough cards there, and put it on the bottom. Blowfly Infestation, 2 and a black enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, if it had a -1/-1 on it, put a -1/-1 on target creature. So continuing up that process. This is very similar to like a Goblin Sharpshooter effect of, hey, you know, this 1/1, I put 1 -1/-1 counter on it, it will die. Then you can put it on another creature that's has 1 toughness, and then you can put it on another creature that was 1 toughness, and you can keep on going until all of those ones die that you don't want. Fire Covenant, 1 a black and a red for an instant. Additional cost to cast the spell. You pay X life. Deals X damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures. So getting rid of a whole bunch of creatures for you. Soul Ring, the new artwork for these specific Lorwyn Shadowmoor ones. I think it looks very, very pretty. Unfortunately, cannot get it in foil. I wish you could. A lot of the ones that come in these sets that have new artwork, I wish you could get them in foil. But that's how it goes. Arcane Signet, also in this artwork, new artwork here for Lorwyn, looks really good. Command Tower in the Lorwyn artwork also looks really good. Cathartic Reunion, discard 2 cards to draw 3. Skin Render, ETBs, you put 3 -1/-1s on target creature. Soul Snuffers, when it ETBs, you put a -1/-1 on each creature. Incremental Blight, you first put 1 -1/-1, then you put 2 -1/-1s, then you put 3 on -1/-1s, but they all have to go onto different creatures. Infernal Grasp, good removal spell. You lose 2 life, but destroy target creature. Evolution Sage, whenever a land ETBs, you proliferate. Very, very good to proliferate in this type of deck. So this deck probably could use some more of that. I think that we've only seen 2 proliferate cards so far. Devoted Druid, a little bit of a mana dork. You can put a -1/-1 on it to untap it, but if there's a way for you to remove it, then you could keep on putting one on, taking it off, tapping to add more mana. Flourishing Defenses, whenever a -1/-1 is put on a creature, you can put a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token onto the battlefield. This is very similar to the Hepatra effect. It's just with elves instead of snakes. But it's whenever a -1/-1, not 1 or more are put on it. So if you have multiple -1/-1s that get put on things, then you get one for each one that gets put on. Harmonize, green spell that lets you draw some extra cards. Putrefy, destroying artifacts and creatures. Binding of the Old Gods, first one gets to destroy non-land permanent there, so get rid of the worst thing your opponents control. You can search for a forest, and then you get a big one where all of your creatures gain death touch until end of turn, so you're able to just swing in. Your opponents can't really do anything or their things die. Kolrath Knight has flying, has wither. Creatures your opponents control with counters on them can't attack or block, so that's going to be the real big thing for this one here is if you're able to put a -1/-1 counter on all of your opponent's stuff, they can't block anymore because of this. So good way of getting around a whole lot of that if you want to deal just combat damage. Contagion class, here's a good little proliferator. When it ETBs, you just put a -1/-1 on one creature, but 4 and tap to proliferate, you're putting a whole lot more on afterwards. Very, very good for that one there. Contagion Engine might be another good one to get in here. Savage Lands gets you all 3 of your colors. Ifnir Deadlands lets you sack deserts to be able to put some -1/-1 counters on it. Overall, not the greatest of lands because you're paying to put black in, tapping to add colorless. You can probably find better lands than this. Night's Whisper, extra draw for losing a couple of life. Worker Bow Elder enters with a -1/-1 on it. You can pay a green to remove it to be able to destroy artifact or enchantment. So another good source for you to be able to put your -1/-1 blight counters on here. Because it can store up to 3 and it's just 1 green to destroy a pesky artifact or enchantment. Terminate to destroy another creature. Commander Sphere probably would get taken out, adds just an extra mana. There are better ways to go about doing this. Cathartic Pyre can either deal 3 damage to a creature or planeswalker, or you can discard some cards to draw that many. Evolving Wilds to help mana fix. Terramorphic Expanse does the exact same thing. Path of Ancestry lets you get a mana in your commander's colors, so very similar to Command Tower, except it enters tapped, but gives you some extra effects afterwards if they share a creature type with your commander. Riveter's Outlook lets you search for one of your basic lands of your Jund colors, gain a life afterwards. Rakdos Carnarium, return lands to your hand, get some extra out there. Same with Gruul Turf, but red-green instead of red-black. Golgari Rotform, you get it in black and green. Kind of good with the Dread Tiller because you could return the land to your hand and then have something die, and then you're like, oh, well, that land gets put onto the battlefield, or, you know, you've already put one out and you can tap it and then use the Dread Tiller to have this go in as an extra one. You know, good on those there. Get some swamps, get some mountains, get some forests, and then we get some of our tokens that we need. Treasures, good old scarecrows there, looking kind of neat there, looking like crows themselves. Some zombies, elf warriors, saprolings, the monarch, more zombies, more elf warriors, saprolings, scarecrows, zombie, elf warrior, snakes, scarecrows, treasures, scarecrows, saprolings, poison counters, snakes, scarecrows, and we've got other things like poison counters for your opponents. And then some extra -1/-1s that you might need. So overall, I think it's a very fun deck of just being like, yeah, you know, -1/-1 counters are my whole personality with this deck, but you can make them work for you very, very well. Now that we've gone through that one, we're going to go on to Dance of the Elements with our good old, I believe, Ashling is going to be our main commander here. And it's like Mass of the Multitudes. Become a chromatic aberration. I don't know much about aberrations there. I'm not really looking forward to that there. I'm looking forward to all of the elementals that we have. So kind of very similarly, we're going to get the little Ashling card, Ashling the Limitless, and Massive Mysteries. That's what it's called. And then we're going to get that little one for us there. And let's pull this out so that we can take a peek at these new ones here, getting some +1/+1s and some other counters on those. Still no pull tab. Nope, this one does have a pull tab on it. So we did get the courtesy of it on this one. So let's get that right on open. and take a quick peek of what we've got in here. So we're going to start off with a commander that we haven't seen yet from our collector boosters, Ashling the Limitless. 2 and a red for a 2/3 legendary elemental sorcerer. Elemental spells you cast from your hand have evoke 4. So you can pay them for their evoke cost instead, except it's sacrificed when it enters, so it gets its ETB triggers, it gets its death triggers, but it doesn't stick around. So very good for ones with very high mana costs that you might want to just get out for their benefits. Whenever you sack a non-token elemental, you create a token that's a copy of it. The token gains haste until end of turn, and at the beginning of your end step, sacrifice it unless you pay Wooburg. So the big thing about that is you evoke it out, but because you have this effect, you essentially create a second one, get it for the end of the turn so you can attack in with your hasted one, but you're essentially creating 2 copies if you evoke something in, which is honestly very, very nice for it. That's a pretty decent effect there. And Massive Mysteries, which we'd seen before, a little bit of a Wooburg cost, 1 of each color for a 5/5 legendary elemental with First Strike, Vigilance, and Trample. In the beginning of combat on your turn, another target elemental you control gains Myriad until end of turn. So when you attack with a creature that has Myriad, you create a token that's attacking each of your opponents that gains haste until end of turn. That's tapped. No, it doesn't gain haste. It's just tapped and attacking. And you exile the tokens at the end of combat, but you essentially get 2 free ETB triggers for it, which is very, very impactful for it. We'd seen this one before, Elemental Spectacle. 5 and a green for Sorcery Vivid. You create a number of 5/5 red and green elemental creature tokens, equal number of colors among permanents you control. Then you gain life equal to the number of creatures you control. So you got Massive Mysteries out there. You're creating 5 5/5s and then getting life equal to the amount of things that you have out there. It's a one-time effect there. A bit expensive, so might want to try to overrun with it if you are able to. Now, we'd seen this one before, probably one of the most expensive cards in the set here, Springleaf Parade. X and double green for an enchantment. When this enchantment ETBs, you create X 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature tokens with Changeling, and creature tokens you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color. So all tokens that you have lets you just ramp a bit. So if those tokens are able to remain around after you play them, or if you're able to give them haste with something like Anger being an elemental, which I'm assuming you want to be able to get that into the graveyard there, then they can all be hasted tappers, and you just essentially paid 2 mana to just have a bunch of extra mana. Yeah. And we're going to be getting into some of those elemental incarnations that we had seen before. Jubilation, 5 and a green for a 5/5 elemental incarnation. When this ETBs, creatures you control get +2/+2, gain trample until end of turn. Encore, now that we get to see it, is 7 and 2 green. You exile this card from your graveyard, and for each opponent, you create a token copy that attacks that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste, and you sack them at the beginning of the next end step. Now, that's the big thing there. It's if you are able to encore this out, then you get 3 copies. So all of your creatures get +6/+6, gain trample until end of turn. If you've got something like Massive Mysteries and you have Myriad, then you can create 2 extra ones, and you're now attacking with all of your stuff has +10/+10 and trample. So, this is what it's kind of there for. Impulsivity, 6 and a red, 7/5, elemental incarnation. When it ETBs, you can cast target instant or sorcery from a graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into a graveyard, exile it instead. So you can get this out, and then you can encore it to then get 3 copies, and then cast 3 instants and sorceries. If you've evoked it out with Ashling, you get 2 versions of it, and then you can do the encore. You could get the myriad from it there, be just casting a whole lot for free. Lamentation, 5 and a black, 5/4 elemental incarnation. When it ETBs, destroy target creature an opponent controls, you gain 3 life. So, you can do all those same things with this, except you're getting rid of a whole lot of creatures and gaining a whole bunch of life there. Encore, 6 and double black. And it wouldn't be right if we kept on going with other ones that we've got, like Belonging, 5 and a white, 6/6 elemental incarnation. When this one does its ETB triggers, instead you get 3 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature tokens with Changeling. Now, if you are able to Ashling it, Encore it, Myriad it, get a whole bunch of those ones out, well, we just had that Springleaf Parade, which is going to let us be able to get a whole lot of extra mana. And the last of those ones that we've got is Subterfuge. 4 and a blue for a 3/5 elemental incarnation that when it ETBs, target creature gains flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you draw that many cards. Now, being able to put it out there, give something flying and then potentially drawing a whole lot, this is a good way to do it. If you do the whole strategy we talked about before of the evoking, encoring, myriad, then, you're probably going to be drawing a whole bunch of extra cards there. And a little bit of new lands to help fix out. Rainslick Copse, cycling land for forest and island. Sodden Verdure, forest island enters tapped unless you have 2 or more basic lands. New land here of Abundant Countryside lets you tap for a colorless. You can tap to add 1 mana of any color, but you can only spend it to cast a creature spell. So with your encore cost, with your evoke cost, or just doing it in general, you can pay 6 and tap to create a 1/1 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. Probably not the thing that you're going to be doing with it because it's a whole lot for just a 1/1. But we're getting some of these special elemental incarnations from Modern Horizons 2, starting with Endurance, 1 and double green for a 3/4 elemental incarnation with flash and reach. When it ETBs, up to 1 target player puts all cards from their graveyard on the bottom of their library in a random order. So disrupt graveyard strategies. You can evoke this out by exiling a green card from your hand. Very nice. We're also going to be getting Fury as well, so it looks like they're not going to keep on going since we don't see them there. But 2 of them are pretty good to have, especially since this one got banned from Modern for being too good. 3 and double red for a 3/3 elemental incarnation with double strike. When it ETBs, it deals 4 damage, divided as you choose among any number of target creatures and or planeswalkers. Evoke, exile a red card from your hand. So, you could evoke this out, deal the 4 damage. If Ashling is out, then you deal another 4 damage. If you've got Massive Mysteries out, the hasted copy from Ashling will then create 2 more and you deal another 8 damage. So, you could potentially be dealing a whole lot of damage with those combos. Haunting Voyage, 4 and double black for a sorcery. Choose a creature type, probably elemental. Return up to 2 creature cards of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield. If this spell was foretold, return all creature cards of that type from your graveyard to the battlefield instead. So by paying an extra 1 mana, you can pay 2 mana on during a turn to exile this card from your hand. During your turn, you may pay 2 mana to exile this card from your hand face down. On a later turn, you can pay the foretell cost of 1 extra from what this cost is. So an additional 3 extra mana to instead return all of your elementals instead of just 2, which is very much worthwhile. Good old Avenger of Zendikar, 5 and double green for a 5/5 elemental. When it ETBs, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. Landfall, whenever a land you control ETBs, you put a +1/+1 on each plant creature you control. If you've got things with Changeling, all of those get +1/+1s as well. Cavalier of Thorns, 2 and triple green for a 5/6 elemental knight with reach. When it ETBs, you reveal the top 5 cards of your library. You put a land from among them onto the battlefield and the rest into your graveyard. When this dies, you may exile it. If you do, put another target card from your graveyard on top of your library. So ETBs and dice triggers goes good with Evoke, goes good with the Myriad. Green Warden of Marasa, 4 and double green for a 5/4 elemental. When it ETBs, you can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. When this dies, you may exile it. If you do, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So more, ETB and die triggers for you to be able to get there. So another good one on doubling up on those. So Vala, Heart of the Wilds, 1 and double green for a 2/3 legendary Elf Scout. Whenever another creature ETBs, its controller may draw a card if its power is greater than each other creature's power, which potentially you could use. However, the big thing that you want is that second ability, green and tap. You add X mana and any combination of colors where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You got one big creature, well, you're adding a whole bunch of mana by just spending 1. Titan of Industry, 4 and triple green for a 7/7 elemental with reach and trample. When it ETBs, you choose 2. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Target player gains 5 life. Create a 4/4 green Rhino Warrior creature token, or put a shield counter on a creature you control. So that's what we saw before, was shield counters. So good one here is going to be, destroying those. If you're running out of life, you could gain the life. If you need some extra creatures, a 4/4 will be nice. Again, hitting it with Myriad lets you create 2 other ones, being able to get a whole lot. Muldrotha the Gravetide, another really good elemental. 3, a black, a red. No, 3, a black, a green, and a blue for a 6/6 legendary elemental avatar. During each of your turns, you may play a land and cast a permanent spell of each permanent type from your graveyard. If a card has multiple permanent types, you choose one as you play it. So you can play a land from your graveyard, and then you can be like, I want this creature, I want this planeswalker, I want this artifact, I want this enchantment, I want this battle, and you can just play a whole bunch of stuff from your graveyard like that. So Muldrotha is a very, very good card, and in an elemental deck, yeah, we can make that work. Omnath, Locus of Rage, 3, 2 red, 2 green for a 5/5 legendary elemental with landfall. Whenever a land you control ETBs, you create a 5/5 red and green elemental creature token. So getting more of those elementals. Whenever Omnath or another elemental you control dies, Omnath deals 3 damage to any target. So that evoke trigger goes off and they die. The Myriad trigger and they go. If you evoked it out and you've got the token that comes in through Ashling and you don't pay, well, hey, that's another 3 damage there. So you can deal a whole lot with that Omnath. Yarok, very, very good elemental here as well. 2, a black, a green, and a blue for a 3/5 legendary elemental horror with death touch and lifelink. If a permanent entering causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, it triggers an additional time. So they got an ETB trigger. Well, it does it twice. They evoked out and you've got Ashling out. Well, Ashling creates 2 tokens instead. It just gets a whole lot of stuff. It doesn't help out with Massive Mysteries at all because this doesn't have any sort of effect there of ETB triggers. It just creates more with that Myriad. We're also going to get a little bit of Omnath, Locus of the Royal. More Omnaths is good. No Omnath, Locus of Mana, though, so far to help out conserving mana. Probably because we're using 5 colors instead of just green. 1, a green, a blue, and a red for a 3/3 legendary elemental with when this ETBs, it deals damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control. So if you've got a lot of elementals, you can smack a player for damage, or you can smack a troublesome creature. Landfall, whenever a land you control ETBs, you put a +1/+1 counter on target elemental you control. If you control 8 or more lands, you draw a card. So kind of nifty, similar effect to that Field of the Dead, except with 8 lands instead of 7. And again, this is a permanent entering instead of just not a creature. So the land double triggers the landfalls, which is always nice, potentially drawing you 2 cards off of that. Timeless Lotus, a little bit of mana ramp there. 5 colorless for a legendary artifact. That ETB's tapped, but once you're able to use it again, you can tap this to add 1 of each color there. So pay 5, and then you get 5 later on each of your turns. Now, the issue is if your opponent removes this, then, well, you paid 5 mana for nothing, so you want to make sure that you're able to keep it. Shatter the Sky, 2 and double white sorcery. Each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, and then you destroy all creatures. So potentially people drawing a card, but a little board wipe there of similar to Day of Judgment. Hoofprints of the Stag, 1 and a white for a Kindred enchantment elemental. So this helps if you are looking for elemental spells. Whenever you draw a card, you may put a hoofprint counter on this enchantment, and you can pay 2 and a white to remove 4 hoofprint counters from this enchantment to create a 4/4 white elemental creature token with flying, activate only during your turn. So potentially, drawing a whole bunch of cards off of some of your other things and paying a little bit of mana to be able to get a 4/4 elemental, that helps out. You're looking for a little bit of a wide board. You're looking for ways of getting elementals out there. We're also going to go Slither Muse, 2 and double blue for a 3/3 elemental. When this leaves the battlefield, choose an opponent. If that player has more cards in hand than you, you draw cards equal to the difference. So, big way to get a whole bunch of extra cards, and it's got an evoke cost of 3 and a blue. So, this definitely has a, you want to use the evoke cost for it. And potentially do it there. Not as great with Ashling because you're already going to have all of them in your hand. So unless you're able to get a lot of mana and play it all out, for you to then be able to want to be drawing a whole bunch of cards at end of turn when you got to sacrifice that the token from Ashling. It is what it is. Descendant's Fury, 3 and a red enchantment. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you may sack one of them. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card that shares a creature type with the sacrificed creature. Put that onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So if you've got some of your tokens out there and you want to get one of your regular creatures out, you could just sack it after it deals combat damage to someone, and then you get one of your regular cards out there. Good for ETB triggers, good for leave the battlefield triggers there. If you do it off of the Ashling thing, it was going to go away anyway. If you do it with the Myriad one, it was going to be exiled anyway. So, there are ways around it. Blasphemous Act, dealing 13 to each creature, can reduce its cost there. Nice little removal spell. Cream of the Crop, 1 and a green enchantment. Whenever a creature you control ETBs, you may look at the top X cards of your library where X is that creature's power. If you do, put one of those on the top of your library and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you get to choose the best card, or the card that is the cream of the crop, and keep it on top and make sure that you draw that card next. Kindred Summons, 5 and double green for an instant. Choose a creature type, reveal cards from the top of your library until reveal X cards of the chosen type, where X is the number of creatures you control of that type, and you put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle the rest of the revealed cards into your library. So potentially you are looking at having some tokens, some creatures out there that are all elementals, and you're like, hey, I've got 8 elementals out there. How about I just play 8 more? It's a pretty good one there. Bane of Progress, good one there of mass removal of artifacts and enchantments. 4 and double green for a 2/2 elemental. When it ETBs, destroy all artifacts and enchantments. Put a +1/+1 on this for each permanent destroyed this way. Realm Walker, 2 and a green, 2/3 shapeshifter changeling. ETBs, you choose a creature type, elemental. You may look at the top card of your library anytime, and you can cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. So you get those elementals. Well, you can you can cast all of the elementals from the top there. Return to the Wild Speaker, good draw spell here, 4 and a green. Instant, choose one. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So you can have a little bit of an overrun effect, but it doesn't give trample, and that's the big problem with it. So that's why I say this is a draw spell, because it's going to be better that you draw these cards instead of pumping things up. Though, if they let a lot of things through, you could potentially use that as the pump spell. Faebro Elder, 1 a green and a white. 0/0 Treefolk Druid with Vigilance gets +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control, so it's bare minimum 2/2. And you can tap this. For each color among permanents you control, you add 1 mana of that color. So potentially tapping it to add 5 mana there. So, more mana ramp on that. Vernal Sovereign, 4 a green and a white for a 4/4 elemental elk. When this ETBs are attacked, you create a green and white elemental creature token with this token's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. It is the token that was from Voice of Resurgence. When the Voice of Resurgence died, that it got that. But this one, it's 6 mana instead of 2 mana. And you get that whenever this enters or attacks, so pretty decent there. Horde of Notions, 1 of each color for a 5/5 legendary elemental with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste. And you can pay 1 mana of each color and you may play target elemental from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. So being able to get a whole lot of them out there comes from the original Lorwyn there, so it kind of makes sense. Maelstrom Wanderer, another really good one here. 5 a green, a blue, and a red for a 7/5 legendary elemental. Creatures you control have haste, so really good to be able to get that out with things that you're going to be bringing back, or that you might want to be able to use to be able to tap them for mana, like the Springleaf Drum ones that we were talking about. And this also has Cascade, meaning that you cascade twice. When you cast it, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile non-land cards that cost less than this, and you can cast them without paying their mana cost. So potentially playing a whole lot of extra stuff as long as they cost less. Gigantha the Wellspring, 4 and a hybrid red-green for his 5/5 legendary elemental elk. It's got Companion. No card in your starting deck has more than one of the same mana symbol in its mana cost, which this does, so you can't use this as Companion, but this does tap to add 1 mana of any color. Not 1 mana of it. It adds 1 mana of each color. It can't be spent to pay generic mana cost, so it can't be used to spend like the 4. But for a deck that has, asking you to pay a whole lot of these multicolors, or just has a lot of multicolors, it's helpful in that. Chromatic Lantern, 3 mana to help mana fix all your lands tap for 1 mana of any color, and this itself can tap for 1 mana of any color. I know some people are not terribly fond of this particular card. However, if I'm playing a 4 or 5 color deck, I kind of want it. If I'm playing something less, like obviously if you're playing a 1 mana, 1 color deck, or even a colorless deck, it does nothing for you. 2, it gets a little bit better. 3, a little bit better, but even at that, I think it really only shines in 4 and 5 color decks when you really need to worry about the mana fixing, whereas 3 and under, you can kind of work around that with cards that you already have. Primal Beyond, a land, ETBs, you can reveal a elemental card from your hand. If you don't, this enters tapped. So it almost says, behold an elemental, but beholding is also if you have it on the battlefield as well, which this doesn't work with. So it's pseudo behold. Tap to add 1 colorless, or you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. Spend it only to cast an elemental spell or activate an ability of an elemental. So good for the encore, or just, playing any of these cards. Raging Ravine. This is a man land for red and green. 2 a red and a green. Until end of turn, it becomes a 3/3 red and green elemental with whenever it attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. It still stays a land. Exotic Orchard, as we saw before, mana fixes there, and because you need all the different colors, it helps every single time. Flamekin Village, as an ETBs, reveal a elemental from your hand. If you don't, it enters tapped. you're going to have elementals. Taps for red, and you can pay red and tap to have target creature gain haste until end of turn, which is nice. Path to Exile, good little removal there. They get to search their deck for a basic land. So Swords to Plowshares is the better one. Hopefully it would be in here. If not, like, you can replace this or, get some other things. Mole Drifter, Evoke, classic, that lets you draw 2 cards. Reality Shift, another removal, exiles target creature, they manifest. Shriekmaw, another one from that classic Lorwyn that evokes out, destroying target non-artifact, non-black creature. Shimmer Creep, it's got Vivid. It looks like this is a new one from Lorwyn. So 4 and a black, 3/5 elemental with menace. Vivid, when it ETBs, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of colors among permanents you control. So a little bit of a semi-draining effect there. Flame Braider, 1 and a red, 2/2 elemental bard. Tap to add 2 mana of any color. Spend it only to cast elemental spells or activate abilities of elementals. That's decent for us. Crib Swap, removal there, exiling target creature, and they get a shapeshifter instead. As we've talked about, very similar to Generous Gift, which was itself a play off of other ones previously, like Rabid Hybridization, I think, and some other ones there. Beast Within. Secluded Courtyard, ETBs, choose a creature type, add colorless, or you can tap this to add 1 mana of any color, spend it only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type, or activate an ability of the creature source of the chosen type there, so elementals. Soul Ring there, so we saw the Duskmourn Soul Ring, and this is going to be our Lorwyn side, the Erdu, while the other one is the other one there. So again, another very pretty Soul Ring. Command Tower, again in the Lorwyn side, another very pretty one. I'm glad that they have different artworks for the Soul Rings, the Command Towers, the Arcane Signets to represent the 2 sides of Lorwyn and Shadowmoor. Distant Melody, choose a creature type, draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. A lot of extra draw there. Incandescent Soul Stoke, pumps elemental creatures. You may put an elemental from your hand on the battlefield. It gains haste, sack it at the end of turn. You're essentially pseudo-evoking it out there, which is nice for some of these. Eclipsed Flamekin, which we did see in the packs there, which I did like. You look at the top 4 of your library, you can choose an elemental, island, or mountain from among them, put in your hand. The rest go on the bottom of your library, so you can pick whatever you need. Formation Breaker, when it ETBs, destroy target artifact or enchantments. Got evoke costs on it there, so, evoking out to destroy something like that. Garruk's Uprising, draw a card if card enters with power 4 or greater. You got a lot of those there. Creatures you control have trample, which is nice, especially with that overrun effect there of Return of the Wild Speaker. And whenever this enters, if you have a power 4 or greater card, power creature, you get to draw a card. Risen Reef, whenever this or another elemental ETBs, you have the top card of your library. If it's a land, you put it onto the battlefield tapped. If you don't, you put it in your hand. So very, very good draw card there that was very impactful in one of those Omnath decks. Felwar Stone, mana fixing there, does the exact same thing as Exotic Orchard. It's just on an artifact. Unclaimed Territory, tap to add colorless, tap to add 1 mana of any color, spend it only to cast creature spells of the chosen type, elemental. Ancient Ziggurat, add 1 mana of any color, spend it only to cast creature spells. Frontier Bivouac, mana fixes of 3. Sandsteep Citadel, same thing. Savage Lands, same things. Opulent Palace, same things. Seaside Citadel, same things. Jungle Shrine, same thing. Smoke Braider, add 2 mana of any combination of colors, spend only to cast elementals or activate abilities of elementals. So a lot of mana ramping that we see in here. Ingot Chewer destroys artifacts with the evoke there, when it ETBs. Fertile Ground, enchant land. Enchanted land taps for an additional mana of any color. Abundant Growth, enchant land, you draw a card when it ETBs, and that land has tap, add 1 mana of any color. So not quite as good as Fertile Ground, which gets you 2 mana. This one just lets 1 land tap for any color. Kodama's Reach lets you get 2 basic lands. Put one on the battlefield, the other goes into your hand. Cultivate does the exact same thing. Path of Ancestry, mana fixes, shares a creature type. You get to scry one, and it spends any color. Thriving Grove. Now, all of these, if they've got all of these thriving ones, remove these out. These are not good for these decks. You choose a color, and it can tap for one color, and then the one that you chose. But there's so much better ways to mana fix that these thriving ones are not good at all. Opal Palace, they're, if you spend mana to play your commander, it gets +1/+1s based off the number of times you've cast it there. You can remove that. Here's the 2 other thriving ones, get those removed, and then you've got some basic lands in here that get fetched for, whereas, you can try to get other lands that might search for a certain type, and instead of the thriving ones, get some of the tri-lands from New Capenna and what was that one called? The one with the mutate that Gigantha came from, that I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but they also had tri-lands in that one as well that had the specific type. So, other ways of getting it. And, we've got things like copies and shapeshifters, elementals and plants, rhino warriors, elementals, and copies and plants and treasures and shapeshifters and elementals and copies and rhino warriors and elementals and copies and treasures and copies. So, very different way that this one is going. This is going for a very heavily tribal deck, kindred deck of purely elementals, getting a whole lot of evoke costs with ETB triggers, leave the battlefield triggers, building a huge board of elementals. Very different from getting a lot of -1/-1 counters out, which, depending on how you do things, if you go about getting them slowly, or maybe you've got your mana dorks get picked off by the -1/-1s, then the -1/-1 deck could probably overcome this. But if this can come out swinging strong and try to make it so that it doesn't get a whole lot of the -1/-1 counters on it, this could come out on top. I think that both of these decks are very, very fun, and I'm looking forward to giving them both a shot and just seeing how they go in the future. Comparatively to what we saw with Edge of Eternities, which surprisingly is the last one that we had decks for. I like these kind of in equal shares compared to how there was just the one that stood out in Edge of Eternities. So, honestly, it's nice. I like them, and I am looking forward to giving them a shot. So, thanks for joining me in and taking a peek at these deck lists and seeing what they were all about. Seems like they're going to be really fun, and I hope that you are going to be successful with whatever it is that you are working on. Please have a good afternoon, evening, or night, and come on back for another one. Until you do, take care of yourself, and I'll see you on that next one.